As we end this special Guns in America, a day in the life, an update from the Uvalde School Police Chief. He is speaking out in his first interview since that mass shooting. Now remember, what we know so far is that the chief had no walkie-talkie. And no walkie-talkie. He didn't have his walkie with him, so he wasn't in charge. And then later we're going to talk with the officers, the two former officers, about this, and they're going to break down that mass shooting. So first, let's take a look at the police delay. Then we'll hear from Uvalde, hear from the chief.
Is that where we're from?
Then also a bit later, we're going to look into the heat advisory, the biggest heat advisory ever. Take a look.
School police chief in Uvalde, Texas is breaking his silence. He spoke to a Texas newspaper about what took officers so long to enter Robb Elementary.
Yeah, ABC's Andrew Dinberg has more for us.
This morning, the Uvalde School District Police Chief is defending the department's response to the school massacre that left 19 children dead. Chief Pete Arredondo telling the Texas Tribune not a single responding officer ever hesitated, even for a moment, to put themselves at risk to save the children. The response coming after the chief was heavily criticized for allegedly ordering officers not to breach the classroom. But Arredondo denies that accusation, saying, "I didn't issue any orders. I called for assistance and asked for an extraction tool to open the door." According to the New York Times, more than a dozen of the 33 children and 3 teachers originally in the 2 classrooms remained alive during the 1 hour and 17 minutes from when the shooting began to when officers officially entered. And during that time, students were calling 911, begging for help.
Is there anybody inside of the building at the time who is advising he is in the room full of victims at this moment?
But Arredondo says he was not aware of the 911 calls because he did not have his radio, saying he left it behind because he wanted his hands free to hold his gun. As for criticism that officers took too long to breach the classroom, one official tells ABC News that Arredondo was overheard saying, "People are going to ask why we're taking so long." But the chief explains during the 77-minute delay, he was looking for a key. The gunman was locked in a classroom with dozens of students, shielded by a reinforced metal door and a steel jamb, which Arredondo says prevented police from entering. He says he called for tactical gear, a sniper, and keys to get inside. But when handed a key ring with dozens of keys, he says none of them opened the door. Arredondo saying, "I was praying one of them was going to open up the door each time I tried a key." Arredondo says he didn't speak out earlier because he didn't want to add to the town's grief.
Hello, I'm Mark Brown. Get more great ABC.
Now, we're going to hear. Now let's hear from that press conference yesterday.
Good evening.
Tonight, Pete Arredondo defending his response. The Uvalde School Police Chief and his attorney telling the Texas Tribune he was committed to stop the shooter or die trying. Running into Robb Elementary armed with his Glock service pistol and no body armor. But the 29-year police veteran left not one but 2 police radios outside the school, telling reporter James Barraga he thought they would slow him down.
He said that was a conscious decision. He rushed in there, put both of his hands on his gun because he was taught that that was the most accurate way to attack the shooter.
We've now learned the gunman walked in through an unlocked door. Arredondo and another officer entering here minutes later. He says they ran towards gunfire in rooms 111 and 112, where both doors were locked. The school's chief says after bullets pierced a door and wall, grazing at least one officer, he called for tactical gear, a sniper, and keys to get inside the classroom. The first ring of 6 keys didn't work. Arredondo says he was later given another with 20 to 30 keys. Precious time ticked by. The chief saying, "Each time I tried a key, I was just praying." 77 minutes after the massacre began, the classroom door was finally unlocked.
Somebody jump out the window.
During that time, Arredondo says he was also telling officers to evacuate people through windows to avoid having students coming into the hallway. And he's refuting the claim from DPS that he was the one in charge.
The chief of police of the Consolidated Independent School District is the incident commander.
Arredondo said he had taken on the role of frontline responder inside the school, assuming some other officer or official had taken control of the larger response.
And in that same interview, the chief went on to say that he never gave any order to any other agency here at the scene, saying because he was unaware that he had ever been made the incident commander.
Wow. That was outrageous. And the Tribune has a full-length article about this. So in the end, Arndardo City remains proud of his response and other officers that day. He believes they saved lives. He also believes that fate brought them back home for a reason. And he's also received death threats and negative messages from people he doesn't know. So, now we know what happened. We now know the reason why it took 77 minutes. It was because of the gear and the keys. That's what we know so far. Now people are angry about this. When we come back, the two former officers are going to break down the police response from Uvalde, why it took 77 minutes, and then later the heating index that happened on Saturday, the biggest one ever in Texas history. Don't go away. Tonight we're continuing our special Guns in America, A Day in the Life, updating you on the Uvalde school shooting. We now learned the chief. We now know why it took the police 77 minutes and why kids are calling 911. But let's now hear from the two former officers who have their thoughts about the police breakdown and why it took Border Patrol and why it involved Border Patrol. Now remember, he did not have the radio at that time because he wanted to be hands-free with a gun.
Testifying Capitol Hill today, we're also learning a lot more about the Uvalde Police Department's response to the Robb Elementary shooting. The investigation continues into what really happened that fatal day and who should have and could have done a better job at what they were supposed to do, and that was protect and serve no matter what the cost. Former San Bernardino Police Chief Jared Bergwijn and also former NYPD Chief of Detectives Robert Boyce join me now. Bob, today the Justice Department is actually outlining plans to review the police response there in Uvalde. Here's what Attorney General Merrick Garland had said.
Our hearts are broken by what happened in Uvalde. There is nothing that we can do that can undo the pain borne both by the survivors, families of the victims, and the community and the country. But the independence and transparency and expertise of the Justice Department can go a long way toward assessing what happened in Uvalde with respect to the law enforcement response and to giving guidance for the future. And that's what we're here for today. The Justice Department is undertaking a critical incident review of the law enforcement response that day at the request of the Uvalde mayor. The review will be comprehensive, it will be transparent, and it will be independent. We will be assessing what happened that day.
Clearly, Bob, an investigation of this magnitude is necessary.
Yes, it's very appropriate. It should happen. I think they should wait until the end of the Texas Rangers investigation. Hopefully that ends soon. But initially, you can see the fault lines already. Why is Chief Arredondo, why was he incident commander? He was in charge of 6 people, and only was there for 2 years. Why didn't someone take over from him initially when they were fired upon? There you have an active shooter, you have to go in. Because there's a cessation of shots doesn't mean you shouldn't go in. The fact of the matter, those kids need help, the ones who are shot. They need immediate aid. So this was a failure that I can see right now. It doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it's even only magnifies the tragedy here. So we had this in Parkland, but these things, these protocols are all over the country, and they're usually carried out with immediacy. It wasn't here.
So, Jared, if you were in charge of this investigation, if this were a department that you had to dig deeper into, where do you even begin with regard to what went wrong and who didn't do their job properly?
Well, I think we have to start with what do we know about the actions of the suspect, and what do we know about the officers that responded and what they knew and what their decision-making process was into what they chose to do or not to do in this case. And that's going to tell a big part of the story as to what their mindset was. You also need to dig into the training and find out exactly what training they had, and did they respond to that training, or was there an utter failure in response to that training? And I think we know that there was a failure here. From an industry-wide perspective, we need to learn to know why. I've often said that these incidents are very much defined by the training that you provide for your officers and the decisions that are made by the very first people that arrive on scene. And we've seen incidents, as tragic as they are, with a successful perception, at least, of the response. And then in cases like this and in Parkland and many others where they did not respond to training, and those were viewed as a failure in terms of a response.
So, Jared, let me follow up with you on that then. Uvalde police say that they paused and waited because they believed the shooter was barricaded and that it was no longer an active shooter event. But how would they determine that without putting eyes on him?
Yeah, that's a tough thing. So in the active shooter protocol, we do talk about when does something transition from an active shooter to a barricaded, because there is, in some cases, something of a transition. But I think all of the experts in this arena and all the people that do the training will agree that if you know that you have victims in the room, if you know that you have wounded people, and they knew that because of the phone calls that they had received, when you have those circumstances, that's not a barricaded suspect. That is still an active situation that has to be dealt with. And you don't have the luxury of hoping that you can negotiate at that point. You have a suspect that has already proven that he's going to do harm, and he has done harm, and he has to be stopped.
And Bob, let me ask you, and Jared, you might want to weigh in on this as well. But Bob, in February of 2022, DOJ actually did this study that showed, and it provided no evidence that the police presence in schools actually makes a difference in improving safety outcomes. So why is this option even being suggested? Bob, I'd love your thoughts, and then Jared too, please.
Sure. So I would disagree with that from what my experience. And 35 years in law enforcement, and also was in charge of precincts where I had high schools that we had a lot of problems with. The police presence is necessary, especially at the breaks in the beginning of school. You know, to show that there's order here and chaos. Show that young people are young people. I disagree with it. I think we could do so much better technology-wise, interlocking doors and cameras and things, and panic buttons, things like that. That should all be put into the resolve of the problem as well. But right away, I don't think it's a negative that police officers at school. I think in some schools it's really important. I don't think it damages the children at all. The incidents like this, everybody's talking about it across the nation, as they should. That's more damaging than anything else.
Jared, before you respond, I have a note here also. The Department of Education did some research as well, and it found that having more police in schools actually criminalized normal teenage behaviors, specifically of Black and brown students. So weigh in. What do you think? Police presence, good or bad thing?
I think that is the entire debate on school resource officers or school safety officers. On one hand, you have the safety component and the fact that an armed officer on that campus has the capacity at least to protect that student body. And on the other hand, you do have the notion that it does, in some cases, has created a school-to-prison pipeline, as it's been called. Here's what I do know. In a large study, when you look at this whole country, there are a ton of schools, and these incidents are relatively rare in comparison to the overall number. It doesn't surprise me that DOJ came out with a finding like that. But this is what we do know. A good school resource officer that has good relationships with students, is trusted by the students, becomes a conduit of information. Students feel comfortable sharing with the school resource officer that they are concerned about another suspect, or another student, I should say, something that they saw, a gun in a bag, somebody that made a comment, and a good school resource officer has the ability to intervene in those particular senses. And those things happen every day in this country, to little fanfare and little news. So we know that there is a successful component. And good school resource officers are able to build that relationship without creating a prison pipeline.
Jared and Bob, always great to talk to you. Thanks, guys, so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephan.
So what are the statistics for the police in our schools? I'll tell you when we return. Let's bring up to speed now in Oxford. On June 9th, the Law and Crime Production posted an article saying the family of Oxford High murder victim sues the district administrators for predictable and preventable mass shooting. The mother of a student who died during a mass shooting at a high school in Auckland County, Michigan last year has filed a federal civil lawsuit against the district and some administrators. The lawsuit is one of two filed on Wednesday in connection with the shooting. Several victims have sued previously. But according to John Hewitt from WWJ, Nicole, the mother's filed a federal lawsuit against the school district for employees following November 30th shooting. Also named in Oxford is Superintendent Tim Throne and Principal Stephen Wolf. Now remember, Tim Throne left before that mass shooting, and we don't know where he's at. Now there's a new superintendent involved. And I said before, if you left the district when you're still being sued, you shouldn't be leaving that area. You're on trial here. There's other lawsuits filed, and this happened in Twitter. The lawsuit asserts that the purpose of extensive training and education is to teach school administrators instead that such actions are not the result of random acts of violence, instead they're predictable and preventable. The lawsuit refers to Crumley on his initials. And also the lawsuit said Crumley became known to school staff, including teachers, council, administrators. And this was other lawsuits. And this was from that lawsuit. I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but this was all on the PDF document. This was from 5 days ago. But the trial is still happening, and we will know what happened, and we'll be posted. Giving Bear continues in just a moment. The debate over schools and our police in our schools continues. Here's an article, and there are statistics. In 1975, 1% of schools reported having police officers on site. By 2018, which was 4 years ago, 58% of schools reported having police presence. SROs are school resource officers, and the current affair laws appealed by authorized legislation for the Office of Community Oriented Police Services, or COPS office, a common in the Department of Justice, responsible. But overall, police are present on a substantial proportion of Connecticut schools. These police are largely the same police who live on the streets. They come from the same department and receive the same training and report to the same chief. There is a lack of evidence on whether their attitudes or approaches to the job differ significantly from other law enforcement professionals. This was all in Connecticut. Research demonstrates that racial and ethnic disparities in discipline are not the consequence of differences in order types of misbehavior by students of color and white students, but rather conscious or unconscious racial and cultural. And there is research to keep for that happening. Research shows that more police lead to more arrests and middle school suspensions. A 2017 national study provides some of the clearest answers. It found that the rates of children increased substantially after schools received federal grants to hire police officers. Starting in 1999, each additional officer led to about 2.5 extra school arrests annually of children between the ages of 7 and 14. There was also evidence that additional police meant older students were more likely to be arrested in both in and out of school. This is what's called the school to prison pipeline. I'm gonna play you a clip from 2020. As you know, back in 2012, almost 10 years ago, 2020 did a full hour about Classroom Confidential, dealing with issues in our classes. And remember, I did the same thing for this show also. And in this clip I'm about to show you, it's all about the discipline here. But it's the same thing that I've been showing you, and I've been telling you guys. And why are you repeating this now, you might ask? It's part of the special. So you're gonna argue if you're gonna like it. If you like it, okay. If not, switch over to a different channel. Take a look. Stinking advertisements. Take a look.
Imagine going into the post office and seeing these crimes.
Let's skip ahead.
To be sure, but worthy of arrest at 5 years in our classrooms. But at what cost? Bad things can happen at school. Guns, drugs, bullying. And as you can see in all those videos on the internet, classrooms run amok.
Shut up and sit down.
So it is for good reason that more and more police are on the beat in hallways and classrooms across the country. But in this climate of controlling behavior, have we gone too far? Case in point, the Texas girl's in the news right now for getting spanked.
After she got caught helping another student cheat, Taylor got a paddle to the backside.
Too hard, their mothers say, by a male vice principal.
Giving her a swat behind closed doors? It is creepy.
Yep, spanking, still legal in schools in 19 states. The 9-year-old in Gastonia, North Carolina, suspended for sexual harassment because, get this, he was overheard telling a friend,
I said Miss Terry was cute.
His teacher was cute. The school later apologized and forced the principal to retire. And this video stunned the nation in 2005. Remember the 5-year-old girl handcuffed by St. Petersburg, Florida police for throwing a tantrum in preschool? How can this be? Advocates say the combination of cops and kids in the classroom is having all kinds of unintended consequences. Some of them so ridiculous, you literally can't make this stuff up.
Your daughter's school decided to have her arrested?
When she was just 12 years old, Alexa was arrested in her New York City middle school, searched, handcuffed, taken away by 4 of New York's finest.
Had you ever been in a police station?
No.
Had you ever been arrested?
No.
Alexa's now 15, but remembers her crime like it was yesterday. Doodling on a desk. With an erasable marker, no less.
So you wrote on the desk. It's not like pulling a knife on somebody, but you're not supposed to write on the desk, true?
Yes.
Are you a graffiti artist?
No.
Did you used to spray paint right all over the walls in school?
Never.
Were you known as that?
No.
Alexa, like some funny tag name that you had that you used?
No.
Alexa had the very bad luck to be attending a school with a zero tolerance for graffiti. And, as her mother would tell you, a similar score in common sense. She says the school officers search her, make her take off some of her clothes. Then, they don't just call her mother, Maraima Camacho. They call the cops from the precinct across the street.
When I saw the police officer go for the handcuffs, I said, you gotta be kidding me.
So they arrest your daughter, they put her in handcuffs. Like a thug.
Right. And she was not resisting arrest.
Turned me over and hands behind my back.
And you got handcuffed?
Metal handcuffs.
At 12?
Yes.
For doodling on a desk?
Erasable marker.
She was crying. She was so scared.
Maybe you find it hard to understand how a little girl gets arrested for writing on a desk. After all, it's not like she perpetrated some heinous crime, something really inexcusable like illegal burping.
I burped and I said, excuse me. She said to quit talking, I'm disrupting.
Francisco Montano is 15 now, plays baseball. He's a slugger. But 2 years ago, when he was 13 in the 7th grade at Cleveland Middle School in Albuquerque, New Mexico, he says he got busted for burping. The school and the police say it was more than that. He was disrupting the class and refused to obey the teacher. And for that, he got arrested.
Officer came up to me. He said because I was disrupting the educational process, he handcuffed me and he drove me to the detention center.
Then the detention center called his mother, Annette Montana.
And he said, our son was arrested and detained for belching in class. I said, are you seriously telling me he's in jail for burping? And he said, yeah, that's what it looks like to me, ma'am.
Francisco was never prosecuted. Instead, he's now suing the school and the police. The Albuquerque police say they only make arrests if the disruption is so bad the teacher can't teach and students can't learn. America's Most Wanted? They are not, says civil rights advocate Judith Brown Dianis.
It is ridiculous. It is extreme discipline. We have gone over the top with this, and instead of teaching children the right behaviors, instead of nurturing them, we're hauling them off in handcuffs.
Francisco Negron is with the National School Boards Association.
I don't think there's a public school to prison pipeline, and I certainly don't think that the presence of school resource officers is in some way contributing to that.
We know there are some bad things going on in our schools. There's gang activity, heavy drug activity, bullying in the extreme where the violence is real, and maybe you have to make sure that those kids get pulled out.
But that's not what we're talking about. Everyone wants safety in the schools. We want discipline in our schools.
Exactly.
But we don't need to see our children put into the juvenile justice system for very minor behavior that could have been handled by a parent.
An Education Department civil rights survey earlier this year shows nearly 100,000 kids arrested in schools. In New York, Alexa, our doodler, fought back. She sued the city.
This is not about the money. We don't want this to happen again to any other child.
While admitting no wrongdoing, the city paid Alexa a six-figure settlement. The criminal charges were dropped, and the case is sealed. But that arrest is still on Alexa's record.
She has an arrest record.
Her attorney, Joseph Rosenthal, says the school's wrong will haunt Alexa for years to come.
For the rest of her life, she has to say, yes, I was arrested.
There you go. We don't need the prison pipeline. But who is more affected by this pipeline? When we come back, we'll tell you. With a lot of police officers in our schools, the question is, who is most affected by the school to prison pipeline? The answer could be individual, the family, the peer, and the school and the community. This was posted last year from the School Education Online program, which I have to say, the bias of the application is part discipline measured over use referrals to law enforcement to the problem. The first step is the alternative approach to school discipline. The danger to zero tolerance. The origin is like this. With the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act. Since 1994, school districts have adopted strict policies that mandate harsh punishment. But the effects of zero tolerance, it's like poverty, poor health, and time in the criminal justice system. But that's only for students who fail to complete their education, like we discussed. But to answer the question before we went to break, who is most affected by the prison pipeline? The statistics paint a picture. Students from marginalized groups are the greatest risk of being drawn into the school prison pipeline. Individually, it's antisocial behavior, congenital disabilities, hyperactivity, physical problems, and substance abuse. The family, abusive or neglectful parents, broken homes, low socioeconomic status, and teen parenthood. Peer pressure, that's bullying or ostracism, or you can pronounce it from peers, gang membership, weak social ties. And school and the school and the community. Impoverished or disorganized communities, poor academic performances. How many students receive out-of-school suspensions? It may surprise you to hear 2.7 million. K through 12 students received one or more out-of-school suspensions during the 2015-2016 school year. During my time, I was a senior at that time. I never knew. 8% of male students were black or African American, but these students represented 25% of out-of-school suspension. 8% of the female students were black or African American, but these students represented 14% of the out-of-school suspensions. Now, before we continue on, this is not racist. This is what they posted on. I'm reading to you what they posted, so don't call me a racist. In comparison, white students received out-of-school suspensions at a rate lower than their enrollment. 25% of male students were white, and these students represented 24% of the out-of-school suspensions. 24% of female students were white, and these students represented only 8% of out-of-school suspensions. Finally, 13% of male students were Hispanic or Latinx, but these students represented 15% of out-of-school suspensions. And 13% of female students were Hispanic or Latino, and these students represented only 6% of out-of-school suspensions. How many students do law enforcement referrals or arrests impact? Over 200,000. 50% were African American were represented. 31% of law enforcement referrals and arrests. 29% of students were white. And 26% of students were Hispanic or Latino. But this could go on and on. But after hearing that, this is going to call for a new Give Me a Break investigation. The school to prison pipeline. So we're finished with our special Guns in America, A Day in the Life. But coming up Monday, Monday on the broadcast, our Give Me a Break investigation into the school to prison pipeline. After what we've heard from the two retired officers, and from watching that 2020 clip, I'll give you my thoughts about the school to prison pipeline. So I'm going to repeat everything that's being, what I told you about today, for those who have missed it. It's a start of a Give Me a Break investigation into the school to prison pipeline. Who is most affected by the school to prison pipeline, and what else can be done? And if you want to hear my thoughts about the school to prison pipeline, visit the newsletter, which I will post right after this episode at givemeabreak.substack.com. You'll also find cases which were on that 2020 report from back in 2012, from that doodler to the burper to the tantrum to the sexual harasser. And look at statistics from a lot of other states that had that school to prison pipeline. That's all of this edition of Give Me a Break Saturday night going to Sunday. We'll see you again for Give Me a Break Monday. For all of us here at YouTube and Give Me a Break. Stay safe, stay cool, stay hydrated. Even though that I got sunburned here. For all of us here at YouTube, don't get sunburned out there. Good night.